Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. My name is Austin Parrish, and I'm the Dean here at Indiana University's Maurer School of Law. Hope everyone is staying warm and safe after the snowstorm last night. And since we just began February, happy Lunar New Year for those who are celebrating, as well as the start of Black History Month. It's my privilege to welcome you to the annual Harris Lecture at Indiana University Bloomington's Maurer School of Law. This is one of our most important endowed lecture events, and we're honored this year to welcome the Senator, a national leader and a wonderful scholar. The Harris Lecture Series was established in 1946 and is our oldest endowed lecture. The series is named after Addison C. Harris, who was born in 1840 and lived until 1916. Addison Harris was a distinguished Indiana lawyer and statesman, a member of the state Senate and a minister to Austria-Hungary. He grew up in Indiana and was one of the state's most well-known lawyers. After his diplomatic post, he returned to Indiana, serving as the president to the University of Indianapolis, a founder and president to the Indiana Bar Association, and a founder and president to the Indianapolis Bar Association, as well as the president of Purdue University's Board of Trustees. The formal launch of the Addison Harris Lecture Series began in 1958 with a dedication address given by Chief Justice Earl Warren, who dedicated the opening of the new law building at the time. Past Harris lecturers have included some of the most prominent and distinguished scholars and legal minds of our generation. They are people who have changed the way we think and have had a tremendous impact on law and legal institutions. Over the decades, they've included some of the most well-known speakers, including, among others, Judith Resnick, Mari Matsuda, Martha Minow, Reva Siegel, Elizabeth Warren, Cass Sunstein, Julian Bond, Doug Kaiser, and Adam Bodner. Last year, we were fortunate to host Robert Post, the Sterling Professor of Law at Yale Law School and Yale's former law dean. All of their remarks have been published in the Indiana Law Journal. Today, I'm very pleased that we're adding to this long list of extraordinary speakers. I will now turn it over to Professor Shauna Wallace, who will introduce this year's distinguished guest. Before joining us in 2016, Professor Wallace practiced both criminal and civil antitrust law for over a decade with the United States Department of Justice's Antitrust Division. The same year she joined us, Professor Wallace received the Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service. She teaches our nationally recognized innovative legal profession course, complex litigation, and of course, antitrust law. Professor Wallace, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Austin. I am thrilled to welcome Senator Klobuchar here on behalf of Indiana University community. Her time with us is especially meaningful for the law school, as Senator Klobuchar's husband, John Bestler, an accomplished lawyer, professor, and scholar, is an alum of Indiana University Maurer School of Law and has provided tremendous support and mentorship to our students over the years. And in dedicating her book on antitrust to Professor Bestler, Senator Klobuchar won the hearts of antitrust nerds and punsters everywhere by declaring that John has a monopoly on her affections. Senator Klobuchar is well known, of course, on the national stage, having served as one of Minnesota's senators since 2007, during which time she's been a vocal and active proponent of legislation that is aimed at supporting families, workers, and businesses, efforts that have often involved her successfully reaching across the aisle. The topic of her presentation today, antitrust law, lies squarely in the heartland of these longtime efforts. Antitrust directly speaks to the economic and daily life issues faced by our shrinking middle class and our growing constituency of those scraping to get by. It is an area of law propelled into existence by popular demand and strong bipartisan support that is sought to preserve our free market system by setting strong rules to ensure fair competition and a chance for new businesses and entrepreneurs to succeed. And yet, as I saw during my decade litigating civil and criminal matters with the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division, it is an area of law that over the past half century has shrunk from the public consciousness, mired in technocratic tinkering and endless regression analyses. No offense to the economists in our audience. As chairwoman of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Competition Policy, Antitrust, and Consumer Rights, Senator Klobuchar has almost single-handedly refocused political attention and efforts on reinvigorating this important area of law. She has led hearings, authored legislation, and perhaps most notably, authored a book on antitrust that manages to be accessible and, dare I say, exciting, while being grounded in 200 pages of well-researched endnotes. Having read the book with a group of my antitrust law students here, you can see the former prosecutor and Senator Klobuchar carefully laying the foundation for an overwhelming case, while making her pitch to her colleagues and the American people that strengthening these rules for the economic road is a crucial endeavor for our country going forward. please join me in virtually welcoming Senator Klobuchar to speak on antitrust, an opportunity for progress in the face of polarization. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much, Professor Wallace, for that really kind introduction and for calling the book exciting. You know, that's not always and accessible, which was one of my goals. And I'm so glad you and a number of your students read it. It's just out in paperback, so it's a little less heavy to carry around. And I also want to thank the Dean. It is such an honor to be virtually at IU. I will say I was there actually with my husband and had a great tour, and he showed me every classroom he ever had a class in. It's such a beautiful campus. So I can picture all of you there right now. And I also wanted to acknowledge your Harris visiting professor, Kelly Testy, who actually worked with my husband. They were both in the same class at IU, and she was the managing editor, and John was the
editor-in-chief.
Editor-in-chief. Okay, guess who's here to correct me? There we go. There's my husband.
Hi, everybody.
He is going to go and be on his own screen. So throughout this lecture, he will not be sharing a screen and correcting me, as just happening. But she was the managing editor, and John was the senior managing editor that year. And so they're very good friends. And so the whole thing ties together wonderfully, and I'm really excited. I want to thank Deborah for her work in putting all of this together, and look forward to talking to you about such a timely topic right now. And the reason, it's almost like you guys, Dean, I don't know, you literally picked the best time ever to have an antitrust law discussion. Why? Because it is so important right now. Because of the fact that it's actually for the first time, maybe in 50 years, and I'm not exaggerating, antitrust changes are on the move in the Congress of the United States. And I think we know how polarized things are. We know the issues with the low approvals right now of members of Congress. And a lot of it is because things aren't getting done, in my mind. And just to kind of put a little bit management perspective, because I know you've got some good business people out there, or people who will end up in business. The way I look at Congress sometimes, there's this thing that President Eisenhower used that then Stephen Covey picked up, which was with his 7 habits of highly effective people. It's a quadrant. And one quadrant are things that are unimportant and not urgent. Okay, so even Congress doesn't spend a time on that. Then there's things that are important and urgent. And we happen to sometimes do okay with that stuff when it's immediately urgent. That is things like floods or hurricanes, or making sure we get funding out, getting the vaccine developed, getting the money out for the vaccine. No matter who is in power, we tend to be able to respond to those things on a bipartisan basis. A financial crisis back in 08, 09. We were able to respond to that fairly effectively through the Bush administration, beginning of Obama administration. Then we spend way too much time, in my mind, in the unimportant, urgent category. That would be like one-day stories on the internet, a tweet that goes out that everyone becomes obsessed with. But the tricky part for Congress, and this is where antitrust comes in, is the long-term challenges, the important things that maybe aren't urgent that day. And those are things like immigration reform, when we have workforce issues, especially in the Midwest, in states like Minnesota and Indiana. It's things like climate change, that you can go day in and day out and not do anything, and it catches up if you don't do anything. And then an example, I think, of something that we have just been woefully inadequate in terms of responding is the competition policy for our country. And note, I call it competition policy. First of all, it's a lot more positive way to talk about it. And the reason it's called antitrust, which you probably all know, is because way back when it started, there were things called trusts that were kind of our modern day dominant companies, monopolies they were, but they were set up in a way called trusts. So the word antitrust developed during the time of way back with the Sherman Act, Senator Sherman and Teddy Roosevelt and the like, because they were taking on the trusts of their time, which are the monopolies of our time, which are the not to just get us to the present, the Googles of our time, the dominance. And so what you've got here is the concept of antitrust, which actually I called my book Antitrust just because I thought it was like too good for words because there's such a breakdown of trust in our country. But in fact, I think as you move forward, the better way to think about this and the way the rest of the world thinks about it, a lot of countries that are dealing with it, is competition policy. Because that's true. We want to have competition. That's a positive in our country. We've always been based on this simple idea that what's good for America is a strong economy and a competitive economy. And actually, when you go way back, as your professors will tell you, to the start of this country and the founding fathers, so many of the people that came over to America, yeah, they wanted political freedom. They wanted religious freedom, right? The Pilgrims, but they also wanted economic freedom. There was a strong vein of entrepreneurship that ran through the beginnings of this country. They didn't want to have to buy their tea from one East India Tea Company, a monopoly. And the Boston Tea Party was, yes, about taxation without representation, but was also about not having to buy and sell to monopolies. And England was big on that at the time, and King George. And so this entrepreneurship vein, you found it through a lot of the letters back and forth with Jefferson and Madison, and should they put something in there against monopolies exactly word for word in our Constitution. Probably smartly, they thought, well, we've got to endure the test of time with our Constitution. And in one famous letter between two of them, one said to the other, don't worry, the Congress will take care of this. Well, it took 100 years, but as the trust got bigger and bigger, and you saw stuff like the Steel Trust and the Rail Trust and the like, finally the Sherman Act passed. And then the Clayton Act, which kind of perfected some of the things with the Sherman Act, which basically both of these bills were about being able to take on monopoly, allowing the government to do it, allowing private rights of action as well. So you fast forward, and there were some really high times for antitrust enforcement in what we call the progressive era, which included, of course, Teddy Roosevelt and Wilson and Taft, which you might not think. And then it goes we're in the middle of wars and depressions, and so antitrust sort of is dormant for a while, and then it picks up again. Probably the highlight being the AT&T breakup, to show how that worked, which was kind of an incredible moment for our country, both on the court side and the congressional side, because it brought the costs of long distance service way down, and also created this incredible cell phone industry, which at the time the cell phones were the size now this dates us, your professors will know what I mean, the movie Wall Street, when Gordon Gekko had a cell phone that was the size of a briefcase. So now let's get to the present. And why did I say this was so timely? Finally, after more and more consolidation in our country, just to give you a sense of it, the United States experienced just in the last few years a tremendous rise in merger control filings in calendar year 2021. The same survey found that US merger transactions are 110% higher even 2021 than they were in 2020. And we know that American capitalism can't thrive without competition. And I kind of go back and forth from the present to the past, because I think it's really important not just admire history, but to use it to teach ourselves of how we handle the present. It was Adam Smith, the godfather, known as the godfather of capitalism, the guy that wrote about the invisible hand, who also said, we must always be willing, I'm paraphrasing this part, to take on the unbridled power of what he called the standing army of monopolies. He said this over and over again because he understood that could be a tendency in a competitive market to tend toward those monopolies. And so we have seen it not just in the tech market, but across the economy. I think it was John Oliver who once did a half-hour segment on this, where he talked about how you see it in everything from cat food to caskets. And at the very end of his show, he said, so if this, and by the way, it's a fun thing to watch, if this is enough to make you want to die, good luck, because there's only 3 casket makers left. And I actually called him. I'm like, no, there's only two because one bought the other. And that is where we're headed. And as a little side note, when my book came out, I did an interview on the Stephen Colbert show. And I told the story of, I go, I hope you don't mind if I mention John Oliver, because there's no monopoly on comedians. And he said, of course I don't mind. And we're live, right? And so we do this thing, and I use the story I just told you guys. And then in that hilarious Stephen Colbert way, he looks at the camera and goes, wait a minute, cut that part about Oliver. Cut it out. And I said, you, sir, are being a monopoly. And he goes, it's my own show. I am a monopolist of my own show. And then he pauses. This is how funny he is. No plan that we were heading this way. He looks at the screen and he goes, and Google, I love you. Now, he got it, because there are so many people afraid to take on monopolies, so many companies afraid, because they want those monopolies to love them because they have nowhere else to go. I cannot tell you the number of companies, very big ones and very small ones, that have approached me or have approached Senator Lee, who is the ranking Republican on the Antitrust Subcommittee, or a number of the senators, including your own senators there in Indiana, and have said, I can't really go public with this, but this is really bad. You guys got to do something, because they're afraid of going public. And that's the power of monopolies. So what do we do about it? And why is this so timely, what you're doing right now? Well, just these last 2 weeks, we've had more action on competition policy and tech companies, which is one of the biggest consolidated areas, in addition to pharma and online travel and certain aspects of agriculture. The biggest 2 weeks that we have had since the advent of the internet. That is true. We have never passed one bill out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, sent it to the floor, or out of any other committee when it comes to competition policy and tech since the advent of the internet. So what's gone on? Well, first of all, a bunch of the companies have bought other companies, right? So you have Meta, had kind of a hard day yesterday. Meta, Facebook, that basically, and we have an email that came out during this incredible 18-month investigation that my friends David Cicilline on the Democratic side, Ken Buck on the Republican side put together. And out of that came this email where Mark Zuckerberg once emailed someone and said, I'd rather buy than compete. He also said, in regard to the purchase of some of these companies like Instagram and WhatsApp, said their brands may be nascent. I'm now remembering this, paraphrasing it. Their brands may be nascent, but in the end, they could be disruptive to us. Okay, I thought competition was about disruption. Especially tech is supposed to be about disruption. That's a good word with tech, because new products come on the market and disrupt things and change the world, right? But what they're basically saying is, let's just buy up a bunch of stuff. So what's the problem for you as a consumer? Because you're like, oh, who cares? We still have Instagram. Well, the problem is we'll never know what the companies on their own as competitors could have done. We'll never know if they could have developed the bells and whistles on privacy or on kids stuff, as you know from if you've been following the Facebook whistleblower, because they bought them. And so that is the issue with what's been going on in tech. So much consolidation with them looking at what's on the horizon, buying companies to the point now where Google is over 90% of the search market. So that's what's happening with tech, and what's happened with the bills that we passed. And I'm going to go through them, and we'll probably go into detail more with the Q&A, and I want to finish up here in just a few minutes. Number one, the agencies. You know, you cannot take on the biggest companies the world has ever known, whether it's pharma or tech, with duct tape and Band-Aids. So Senator Grassley and I have a bill to change the way the merger fee statute works. And that's already passed out of the US Senate. It's a part of what this semiconductor bill which is an important bill that's being put together now, first passed with Senator Young of Indiana and Senator Schumer. And that is now sitting over there. They included our provision, and we have every reason to believe that's going to pass. So that'll give us about over $100 million for the FTC, Department of Justice, Antitrust. We need a lot more than that, actually, to continue the work on the Facebook and Google lawsuits and other things. So that's one thing to look at. Another bill that's on the move that's interesting is a bill that helps the state AGs and let them keep venue when they bring cases so that the tech companies can't move them to delay them. That's a bill I have with Senator Lee. Another bill that's on the move, and these are these two that just passed out of the Judiciary Committee. One is a broader bill, which is my bill again with Senator Grassley, which is about not allowing companies to self-preference their own products and put them at the top of the search engine, not copy stuff. And the second one that just passed yesterday, this is why you guys are so timely, on a vote of 21-1, after the tech companies spent $70 million against us last year, was a bill that took on the App Store issue. And that's with Senator Blumenthal and Blackburn and myself. And again, bipartisan. And that basically says, wait a minute, how come you're charging 30% to Match.com? There was a very funny moment in the hearing that Senator Lee and I had where he asked them, now, wait a minute, you don't charge Uber this rate when they have their apps on your app store, but you do charge Match.com. And the witness's answer was, well, those are cars and rides. Okay, but when people meet, then you charge them 30% of all the revenue they get off the App Store has to go to you when it happens to be people meeting through a dating service. So those are the kinds of things that we're dealing with when it comes to competition. I'm going to probably end there, but just I think you guys know what we're up against, which is, I mentioned, the $70 million, 2,700 lobbyists have been hired by tech. So the fact that we have gotten to where we are is kind of an amazing thing. And I think it's because the public has realized enough is enough. I can't tell you it's the first thing they answer in public opinion polls, but I do know that the public's lack of trust in institutions, the misinformation that is so often out on the internet, the fact that people are having to click on things that they don't even understand what they're doing and their data is getting taken away from them. They don't own their data. These companies own their data. They're using it to target them with certain ads, which might be okay if you agreed to it or you got part of the profit off of it. But it is all going to dominant tech platforms. So that's what I think has created this thing. The word antitrust, while I think it should be competition policy, is suddenly very relevant today. And I am so glad all of you have joined us for this, and I'm looking forward to answering the questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Klobuchar. Before we enter the Q&A portion of today's event, a quick announcement for the lawyers attending this event that would like CLE credit. The code 203139 and instructions on how to receive credit can be found in the chat of the webinar.
I don't know if I've ever been part of a CLE credit. I remember getting credits myself when I was at the law firm and as the DA, but this is very exciting that I'm giving.
This is what you get for writing an academic book.
You know, better than passing a bill. All right.
So many of you submitted questions when you registered to attend the event. And other questions may have arrived during the presentation, and we'll hopefully get to as many as possible during the time remaining. But I am very pleased to have some of my outstanding antitrust students here. Senator Klobuchar has graciously agreed to let them be the mouthpiece for the questions here for some of their questions and some of your questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to my first student here.
Hi, Senator Klobuchar. First off, thank you so much for speaking with us today. My name is Justin Lorber. I'm a 3L here at Maurer. And so as you referenced in your talk, there's a lot of proposed legislation and changes that have appeal across the political aisle. And an audience member wants to know what the chances are that some of these bills, like the American Innovation and Choice Online Act or the app bill that was discussed this week, have a chance of making it across the finish line.
So if you'd asked me that last year, Justin, I'd be like, I don't know. We've got so much against us. I'm feeling better and better about that. Now, what combination of bills will pass will be interesting. As you know, in the US Senate, if I'm sure some of you guys were watching that voting bill, which by the way, I was the chair of the Rules Committee, headed up that effort where at least I got all the Democrats to agree on language, but then we failed because of the filibuster. We have to get 60 votes to get anything done. And we also have to get floor time, which is very precious with the way the Senate works. But the fact that we have this huge coalition, which Samantha Bee called the Ocean's 11 of co-sponsors on my bill on the self-preferencing that I mentioned. It is everyone from, get this, Mark Warner and Cory Booker and Dick Durbin to Chuck Grassley. These are all co-sponsors. Lindsey Graham, Josh Hawley, and Mazie Hirono. That's just a few of them. And we have worked really hard to build that coalition. We're very different ideologically, but we all are devoted to a competitive marketplace. That greatly helps us. Senator Schumer, I've talked to him directly, the majority leader, even in a 50-50 Senate because of the tie breaking, that's his title. And he's committed to getting us some floor time. I believe it has to be sooner rather than later. If we get into the late summer and into the fall, we're right into the midterm elections, and it just makes it harder because everyone's looking for some political gain out of something. And the fact that the App Store bill got 21-1, the fact that my bill that I just mentioned, which is a broader bill, came in at 16-6, and that some of those other bills that I mentioned are doing well. On the House side, they passed, I think, 4 or 5 different bills, some of which are even more aggressive than ours. We made some changes to ours to pick up more support. They passed those out of the House Judiciary Committee, and their members are very well informed of this after that long investigation that they headed up. So I just think we're in a better place. Do we combine them with some bills that are from other areas outside of tech, perhaps, and have a competition bill? As I mentioned, the money bills are going to go through, the funding the agency bills are going to go through for sure, at least one of them. And I'm just feeling better and better about our possibilities of moving forward. Those 2 companies, well, I guess I'll go through all the companies between Facebook and Google and Apple. They have spent more money lobbying than any other combined than other industries, and 2 or 3 of them are in the top 5, including Spaces 1 and 2, of who spent the most on lobbying. So given that that's how much we were up against, the fact that we're making progress is quite extraordinary. So I feel good about that. There's a whole nother side of this, which we're more focused on competition policy with this lecture today, but there's the privacy bills and the Section 230 immunity, which maybe we can get at a little bit, but about, when you have speech that is not protected and the companies use their algorithms to actually make money off that speech, what happens then? Because right now they have full immunity for anything from lawsuits. It's a fascinating area. There's starting to be interest in it on both sides, but the competition policy piece of it is probably ahead of that piece of it in terms of being able to pass the Senate.
Great, thank you.
Good, thanks.
Senator Klobuchar, I just wanted to thank you again so much for being with us today. My name is Parker Zimmerman. I'm also a 3L here at Mauer. The next question is actually one of the questions that I had when reading your book. So one of the proposals you had was for agencies to take on a retrospective investigation of consummated merger transactions in addition to kind of increasing enforcement against the proposed mergers that they already look at. What additional staff and resources would be required for Congress to allocate for those investigations to be kind of successful and meaningful, and those enforcement actions to then take place on top of kind of, as you mentioned, the fact that they're so understaffed already? Do you think that there would be congressional will to allocate those kinds of resources on top of kind of the fee restructuring you talked about quickly?
Yeah. Sure. Yes. And, there is always difference of opinions about, like, for instance, the FTC. My ranking member on the subcommittee, Senator Lee, has very different views of the FTC than I do. But yet there's a lot of other Republicans that are willing, like Senator Grassley, to put funding into the FTC because they see, and FTC does some stuff, DOJ, Antitrust does other stuff. They see that as the way you actually take on these companies. Do I think we need to change the laws on not just tech antitrust, but antitrust in general? Yes, we have reinvigorated our antitrust policy through congressional action many, many times in the past. Some of this is coming out of some Supreme Court decisions over the years that I think actually took us further and further away from the original intent of the Sherman Act and Clayton Act by making it very hard to bring these. At the same time, we've got bipartisan support for moving forward, which is always a key to getting the resources. And one of the best exhibit A's of that is that these lawsuits that were started by the FTC against Facebook under Chairman Simon, who is a chair appointed by President Trump, and the DOJ Google suit, which was brought by my friend Macon Delrahim, who again was served under Attorney General Barr and served, and maybe Sessions as well, and again, part of the Trump administration. Those suits are the suits that are being continued by the Biden administration appointees, which is critical when you think of the AT&T merger. While there may have been some different philosophies that span Democratic and Republican administrations in terms of taking it on. And that just shows bipartisan support for moving forward. I still text or talk to Macon Delrahim all the time. He gives me ideas and, is still interested in this. Boy, that's a game changer when you have those two administrations that have such different views on other things united on this. That really helps. And so that, to answer your question, gets at why I believe, in addition to the Klobuchar-Grassley, I'll give myself credit here, merger bill that is going to pass, that's the over 100 million in. I think there's a chance in the budget, which is also bipartisan, coming right up to up the money for the agencies, as well as possible if we do a Democratic only bill. And boy, we're not going to go into the whole Build Back Better drama, but that included more money for the antitrust agencies and privacy enforcement. So that's also possible.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, Senator Klobuchar. My name is Emily McDaniels, and I'm a 3L. I'll be asking an audience question today. So you're known for being able to work across the aisle, but one of our audience members wants to know how we bring everyday Americans together on the quest to end monopoly power, and how we get Americans to see the light and not just Congress people.
Great question. In the past, it was a lot easier. They had the whole antitrust movement came up from the grassroots. It was farmers with pitchforks out there with the Granger movement. It was people activated protesting against monopolies, whether it's the Pullman Rail Company, whether it was ag interests, whether it is rail companies. There was a lot of activity. In fact, I think it was President Wilson that even had a campaign song, which I mentioned in my book, devoted Bust the Trust. Can you imagine a presidential campaign song about antitrust? You have William Jennings Bryan out there. Both sides of the aisle were competing on antitrust. And by the way, you see a little of that in Congress right now, which I think is a really good thing. How the American people get motivated. Well, they get motivated when prices go too high. And there's arguments in some sectors that is happening right now because of consolidation, whether it's cable rates, whether it's some of the food prices and things like that. That is a valid argument to use when you see consolidation. They get motivated when they think these big companies, and boy, is this ever an example with the Facebook whistleblower, these big companies are intruding into their lives so much that they can't even raise their kids. I thought the best example of this was a mom, and I did something on this with a House member, and I did a Zoom call with a bunch of parents after the Facebook whistleblower came on with Hakeem Jeffries. And one of his parents, I had Minnesota parents on, and he had parents on from Brooklyn. And one of the moms talked about the fact that she just couldn't keep up with turning off all these things and filtering out stuff her kids were seeing. And her kids were like young kids, 6th grade, 8th grade. And she could only rely on her oldest kid, who was like 16, to try to help her to do it. And then she'd turn off one filter and then they'd start seeing other things. And as a Facebook whistleblower so beautifully told us, this is like kids starting to see stuff. They're writing a paper about nutrition, and they then get exposed to starved to death accounts and different things about basically eating disorders, trying to lure kids into that. And this mom said she felt like she was standing in front of a sink and the water was just overflowing and overflowing. The faucet was on and she was standing out there with a mop, just trying to sweep it up and could never get it done. That's how a lot of parents feel right now. They want their kids to do their homework. TV is a little easier for them to monitor, but it's really hard for them to monitor what they're seeing on the phone when they're being exposed to this content. I think that kind of thing also has been captivating the public right now and want them to get things done. It's not going to be the same as Granger's out there with pitchforks, but it is still about public interest that is based on things that are making things feel like it's out of their control. And it is. These companies are making decisions for them on how to be parents instead of them making them themselves.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Senator Klobuchar. My name is Ian Finley. I'm a 2L here at Mauer. And my question starts with a statement. Your book had some amazing antitrust political cartoons. I had no idea there were that many out there. Did you have any favorites?
Well, I did, and maybe I can show it up here, but there's one called The Bosses of the Senate that I actually have in my office. And it was published on January 23rd, 1889. And when you see those big voluminous balloons there that shows on the screen, looking over the members of the Senate, this was in 1889. And at the time, it's like the steel beam trust, the copper trust, sugar trust, the iron trust, and they're hovering over all of these little senators sitting down there. And the big sign in the middle says the Senate is of the monopolists, by the monopolists, and for the monopolists. The people's entrance is closed, but the entrance for monopolists is wide open. Now, why would this be relevant to me right now? Because right now you could literally have the same cartoon and you could have up there the tech monopolies and the pharma monopolies and the online travel monopolies. And it's really a lot of the same thing going on. And I think it's become, sometimes things become so outrageous that the electeds finally realize that the people are pissed off, and then they respond and there's a backlash. And that's where we are right now. But I did decide that trying to make antitrust cool again meant bringing back some of these old cartoons. By the way, they're free to use in books before a certain date. My husband knows that date. What is it? I don't know what it is. 75 years. 75 years. Thank you. Thank you. He also did all those footnotes, by the way, for the book that were mentioned earlier in the introduction. And helped me a lot in terms of the research. But the cartoons were so interesting because so much of it is relevant today. You just fill in the names for different trusts. But that's the one that I have in my office.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Senator. I'm back this time with an audience question.
Okay.
Kind of ties in a few things we've talked about so far and goes back a little to bipartisan support. So Democrats and Republicans seem to be on the same page, albeit maybe for different reasons, on the status of some monopolies, such as tech and social media, kind of as we've been talking about. But what common ground can be found relating to kind of the privacy concerns you mentioned in that sector?
Exactly. And, I think there's also common ground on this. There's a major bill that I'm on that Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington State leads, and that basically sets some federal privacy laws in place. So what's been going on here, it's really interesting because it reminds me a little of, and this is your data and you opt in or opt out and you have to have more knowledge. And clearly the public is with us on this. In fact, when you read the articles, go back and read them from today of why the Meta Facebook numbers, by the way, I maybe would have changed the company instead of changing the name, but I won't go there. But I already did. When one of the reasons that the stock went down is, well, this $10 billion investment in the metaverse and other things. But one of the reasons given is the fact that Apple actually took some strong moves, made some strong moves to protect privacy and made their users on their phone, you've noticed it yourself, you can sort of opt out of having your data shared all the time. Well, that's right. And a lot of other countries do that. And one of the things when you see in Facebook's own reports, they made over $200 over each one of you that has a Facebook account in one quarter last year. $200 a quarter. You didn't even know you're making that for them. That is almost double what it is in other industrialized nations because there's more requirements in place for the data. So that, of course, affected some of their market, and who knows if they're going to bounce back today. But I'm just saying this is really interesting, the privacy part, because from a consumer standpoint, what Apple did shows where people are. So what I think we need to do is put some rules of the road in place on the federal level. The other thing that's interesting with the antitrust and other things, often what happens is things get so bad, like they've had with privacy, with people's data getting breached, that individual companies decide, you know what, individual states go, we're going to act. So California puts a strong privacy law in place. Finally, the companies that have been opposing any federal action come to the federal government. Well, I don't remember really what side they're on or what their interest is. Say, whoa, this is like a patchwork all over the country. And I'm kind of laughing because I said, hey, only 5 years ago, you guys said we shouldn't do anything on privacy. But whatever it is, it creates an incentive to do something on the federal basis. So it just makes me think at some point we will get this done. And there is differences right now when it comes to a private right of action in the bill, when it comes to what the standard should be. So Senator Cantwell and Wicker have been working on this, but it comes out of a different committee, the Commerce Committee. And I'd also add there's some things on the internet that Senator Markey been working on for a long time with kids and special updating the rules when it comes to kids on the internet.
Perfect. Thank you again.
Yep.
Hello again, Senator. Back with another audience question.
Great.
So one of the key priorities in your book was to raise the public concern over monopolies and corporate consolidation. But some potential problems to that could be encouraging public interest in challenging competition for free services such as social media and challenging current lower prices for consumers. What do you think are the best ways to overcome those challenges, or just general hesitancy from consumers that changes in the antitrust system will lead to higher prices?
Right. Okay. So this is, and I didn't quite answer that previous question about the retroactivity. So this gives me an opportunity to come back at it again. So on the merger front, we're always going to have mergers in this country. And we've always had agencies that review those mergers to decide if whether or not they are in violation of the antitrust laws. And what has been going on in terms of allowing mergers, I think it was Bill Baer, who was the head of antitrust under President Obama, once said that things were coming out of the boardrooms that shouldn't even come out of the boardrooms. Why? Because court decisions, I mentioned this already, in the last decades have made it harder and harder to challenge mergers. And so there's a bunch of things that have happened really because of that lack of resources. We had a hearing 2 days ago that I chaired with Senator Lee on the issue of closing newspapers, right? Thousands of newspapers that have closed and broadcasters and the like, because of the fact that the social media platforms are sucking up all the revenue. And one of the things on that front is the fact that these companies are so big and there's just no ability to be able to deal with them or compete. And so that gets you to this issue of the mergers and how you deal with it. I personally believe, and by the way, at that hearing, one of the most conservative witnesses supported more money for antitrust for the agencies. I personally think that the best way to get at it is, yes, some changes in the law for the biggest mergers, so that the biggest mergers, you could at least give the agencies some more leverage by saying, hey, these companies have to prove that it doesn't hurt competition, as opposed to the agencies having to show that it does hurt competition. You wouldn't do that with every merger, just the biggest one. And then when it comes to the review of these things, that you give them the resources they need to do it. So it's kind of twofold. I would change the law some, and then I would up the agency's money. In terms of the past review, which I didn't quite answer, I use the AT&T example. We've always done reviews of industries because sometimes things just keep getting approved. It seems okay. And then all of a sudden, that's what AT&T was about, right? All of a sudden you go, whoa, these guys have a horizontal monopoly over phone service. They have a vertical monopoly over all the equipment that goes into phone service. We need to step back and look at this. And so I think both things go on. Looking at mergers going forward, better standard, more resources, and then also backwards. And when it comes to your question about the prices and things like that, that is one factor that you want to look at. But you also have to remember that history, as I noted before, should be our guide. Maybe the prices look okay for a while because they've got like lost leaders, but antitrust law has been based on market power and percentage of markets and how big your market is, because we know very well, even if they're offering lower prices for a while, at some point they start offering higher prices because they are the only ones that can offer the prices. And that's why we have antitrust enforcement.
Great, thank you.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you. We want to end on one last question that's a little more general.
Okay.
Picking up on an audience question and on the title of your talk about a chance for bipartisanship. And an audience member has asked if you could describe the level of collegiality and productivity, and if there's a difference that you've seen since 2007 when you joined. And if you're optimistic, your sighing makes me think maybe no.
No. I was actually, I've always been involved in the National Prayer Breakfast, the Senate Prayer Breakfast, and I was there yesterday when President Biden spoke, and it was a completely bipartisan event. And one of the points he has been making is if people knew each other better, And I actually have made my priority to be friends with people on the other side. Senator Blunt and I, who chaired the inauguration last year in a very important moment after the attack on the Capitol and the insurrection. And it was the two of us, another Indiana reference, and Vice President Pence, that were the three people at 3:30 in the morning walking through the broken glass and the spray painted statues to do our job. And the three of us did our job from very different political perspectives and held up our democracy as far as I was concerned. And so President Biden yesterday was talking about how if you knew each other, and I feel like I have like really close friends with a lot of Republicans, including my good friend Senator McCain that we lost, and so many others on the other side. I'm not sure he is right that that's part of it, but it's not the only part of it. The other part of it is this crazy polarization in democracy when it comes to what people are watching, what they're exposed to for information. And we're never going to, limit people's right to be able to be exposed to information, but it's a factor, right? And how you bring people in so they're seeing, this is why I'm such a big believer in like local news, because that still does bring people in. They're watching their own local news. They're watching they're cheering on their high school football team, and they are joining together to help flood victims. I think it's really important we don't lose that because that's something that brings people together, even if they don't agree with each other. They're at least being exposed to the same kinds of facts. And I think that is not just members getting to know each other. The other thing is the money in politics and how it is more and more these like super PACs and stuff on both sides. And then you don't even have control over how the money is spent on your own campaign. Now, I've been fortunate to, in my Senate races, not really ever have super PACs. I just kind of do my own thing and choose to run positive campaigns. That just isn't the fact in every other race. And I think that that also has this polarized effect because people are afraid, not necessarily of how they're fighting with the other side. They don't want to piss off the people on their own side, or they don't want to be on the cable network that does that, whether it's on the left or the right. And that can be really, really damaging. And it doesn't matter how much time you spend together. So to me, those are institutional democracy problems. And the answer is not necessarily always government regulation, although boy, do I think passing the Disclose Act to make all that public, or passing a constitutional amendment when it comes to overturning Citizens United, which I favor, would make a big difference. it's not just that, it's what you guys are doing. It's that civic discourse and putting a premium on people actually getting things done, which the voters poll after poll shows. That, I hate to say, that is going to be the most immediate hope we have, is that people just start to see, as my friend John McCain would always say, that there's nothing more liberating than a cause larger than ourselves. That cause right now is our democracy, our economy, the future of our country. And that was what the president was focused on in his talk yesterday at the prayer breakfast. It's also what Brian Stevenson was talking about, and it's what my Republican colleague, Senator Rounds, was talking about from South Dakota when he spoke. So I think that we just have to remember that and take that spirit with us. And this lecture and the work you're doing by even going to law school, something that our daughter is doing right now, by the way, is, I think, a part of that. By even making the decision to pursue this career, you have made a decision that no matter where you are ideologically, that you are devoted to the rule of law in our country. And that can make all the difference. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar, for bringing us back to that big picture. And thank you so much for your time today. This is
it was a lot of fun.
really fun. Thank you. And I wish everyone join me virtually, but thank you.
All right. And thanks to my husband. There he is. No, we're going to go have lunch.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
I think that concludes today's Addison Harris lecture. Many thanks to the senator, for all of you for joining us. And thanks to everybody here from the Maurer School of Law. Take care.